It was one of those summer mornings when everything felt right in the world. The air smelled like salt and sunshine, and the sound of waves breaking on the shore filled the background with a soft rhythm. A small family had arrived at the seaside resort the night before, ready to spend a few days away from the city noise. The parents had promised their children that this would be a trip to remember, just them, the ocean, and endless laughter. The mother was the kind of person who carried calmness in her eyes. She loved the sea and believed it brought peace to anyone who stood long enough to listen to it. The father, on the other hand, had a quiet strength about him. He wasn't much of a talker, but when he smiled, it warmed the whole room. Their 2 children, an older son and a younger daughter, were inseparable. The girl, barely 12, was full of energy, always curious and loved collecting shells and small stones from the beach. Her laughter often echoed louder than the waves. That morning, they spread out their picnic blanket near the water. The father unpacked sandwiches and fruit while the mother took photos of the kids playing. The daughter ran barefoot across the sand, her hair flying in the wind, chasing tiny crabs that darted into holes. The son built a sandcastle, calling her every few minutes to help decorate it with shells. It was a picture-perfect scene, one that would later replay endlessly in the parents' minds. As the afternoon sun climbed higher, the mother suggested they take a break. The father went to get drinks from a nearby stand, while the children played close to the shore. A group of people had gathered around a beach game, cheering loudly, and for a few minutes the parents got distracted by the noise and laughter. When they looked back, they saw the boy sitting alone beside the half-finished sandcastle. "Where's your sister?" the mother asked, her voice light but curious. "She went to get another shell," he said, pointing toward the water. The mother shaded her eyes with her hand, scanning the beach. There were children everywhere, but her daughter wasn't among them. The waves had grown a little stronger, pulling back with more force. She called her name once, then again, louder this time. No answer. The father hurried over, sensing her worry. He joined the search, walking along the shoreline, asking other families if they had seen a girl in a yellow swimsuit with braided hair. Some shook their heads kindly. Others joined the search for a while. Minutes turned into an hour. The boy started crying, his voice trembling as he called for his sister. The mother's heart pounded harder with every passing moment. The father ran toward the lifeguard station, his voice shaking as he explained that his daughter was missing. Within minutes, the lifeguard sounded the alarm and people spread out across the beach. Boats went into the water. The sun began to lower and shadows grew longer, but there was still no sign of her. By evening, the Coast Guard joined the search. Helicopters flew over the sea, shining lights across the dark water. Divers went below the surface, searching every possible corner. The family waited on the shore, holding each other tightly. The mother refused to leave, staring at the waves as if her daughter might walk back to her any second. The father sat beside her, silent, his hands buried in the sand. The boy leaned against his mother's arm, too tired to cry anymore. Days passed, but the search continued. Every day, the parents woke before sunrise and went back to the beach. They spoke to the rescue teams, handed out pictures, and followed every rumor, every sighting, every call that said, "We might have found something." But it was always nothing. Then, one morning, a fisherman brought in a small torn backpack he'd found caught in his net. Inside was a small notebook filled with childish handwriting, a few pages wet from the sea. The mother recognized it immediately. It was her daughter's. She pressed it to her chest, tears falling silently. The authorities told them they would keep searching, but deep down everyone knew what that usually meant. Still, the mother refused to accept it. Every night she left a small lantern burning by the window of their hotel room, whispering a prayer that her daughter would see its light and find her way home. Weeks turned into months. The resort eventually became empty again. Tourists stopped talking about the missing girl, and the news found new stories to tell. But for the family, time had stopped on that day. They returned home with only a few bags and a heart full of unanswered questions. The daughter's room remained untouched. Her favorite book still sat open on the desk, a half-read page waiting for her to return. The father began to blame himself quietly. He replayed the moment he turned away to buy drinks over and over, wondering what might have happened if he had stayed. The mother tried to hold the family together, but she often found herself staring out of the window, lost in thought. The house, once filled with laughter, grew heavy with silence. The boy, now without his sister's constant chatter, became quieter too. He missed the way she used to make him laugh, the silly songs she would hum, and the way she always took his side, even when he was wrong. Years went by, and though life continued in small ways, school, work, birthdays, it never truly felt normal again. The mother kept a small box on her nightstand, filled with her daughter's drawings, photos, and letters she had written over the years. Every year on her birthday, she would write one more letter and add it to the box. The father spent most of his time near the sea, sitting quietly with his fishing rod staring at the horizon. People in the town knew their story and often offered kind words, but there were no words strong enough to fill the empty space the girl had left behind. The mother never gave up hope. She couldn't. Somewhere deep inside, she believed her daughter was still alive. She dreamed of her often, standing on a beach somewhere far away, looking back at her with those same bright eyes. In her dreams, the girl was older but still smiling. Every morning after such dreams, the mother would wake up with tears in her eyes and whisper to herself, "One day, I'll find you." Sometimes, small things would remind them of her. A song on the radio, a seashell found in a drawer, a breeze carrying the smell of salt and sand. The pain never faded, but it softened into something quieter, like a shadow that stayed close but didn't always hurt to look at. 10 years passed like that. The family had learned to live with the ache, though it never left completely. Friends and relatives stopped asking about the missing girl, afraid to reopen the wound. But inside that house, her presence was everywhere, in photos on the wall, in the laughter that used to echo there, and in the love that never disappeared. One evening, the mother sat by the window writing another letter to her lost daughter. She looked out at the fading light, the sky turning orange and pink. She wrote about her day, about how her brother was growing up fast and how they still missed her more than words could say. When she finished, she folded the letter carefully and placed it in the box with the others. Then she whispered softly, "Wherever you are, please know we never stopped waiting for you." At that moment, she didn't know that far across the sea, on an island she had never heard of, a young woman was standing by the shore looking at the same sunset. Her hair blew in the wind and her eyes were filled with something between hope and sadness. She bent down, picked up a small shell, and whispered a name she hadn't spoken in years. The waves rolled in, soft and endless, carrying her words somewhere far beyond the horizon, back toward the family that had never stopped loving her. Years had passed since that summer day when the ocean took everything from the family. Seasons came and went and the world moved on, but inside their small home, time seemed to stand still. The mother still woke up every morning and looked at the picture on her bedside table. A photo of her daughter smiling at the beach, hair blowing wildly in the wind. She touched it gently every day before getting out of bed, whispering a silent good morning. It had become her ritual, her way of keeping her child close. Life didn't stop completely, but it slowed down. The father took a new job in a quieter town, far from the sea, yet close enough that they could still smell the salt in the air on windy days. The mother opened a small flower shop, filling her days with color and fragrance. It was her way of finding moments of peace. Their son grew taller, more serious, and more careful about everything he did. He carried a kind of quiet guilt, even though he had been just a child himself. Sometimes, he would still dream of that beach, of the sandcastle they built, and the moment his sister ran off toward the waves. He would wake up sweating, heart pounding, and spend the rest of the night staring at the ceiling. The house they moved into was smaller, but warm. They painted the walls a soft cream color, filled the rooms with flowers, and tried to make it feel like home. But no matter how many changes they made, something always felt missing. A laugh, a voice, a presence that no one could replace. On some nights, the mother still set an extra plate at the table out of habit. When the father noticed, he didn't say anything. He simply moved it aside, quietly placing his hand on hers. Every year on the same date, the family visited the coast where it all began. They stood at the edge of the water, holding flowers that they let drift into the sea. The mother always spoke softly into the wind, telling her daughter that they hadn't forgotten her, that she was still part of them, and that one day, somehow, they would meet again. Even if no one was listening, it helped her heart breathe. The neighbors in the new town admired the family's strength, but they also saw the sadness behind their smiles. Some people whispered that it was time to move on, Others believed that miracles could still happen. The mother listened to no one. She carried her hope like a flame, small, flickering but never dying. Then one cold morning in late autumn, something unexpected happened. The mother walked outside to collect the mail like she did every day. Bills, a few advertisements, and one envelope that looked strange. It was old-fashioned, slightly worn, and had no return address. The handwriting was shaky and unfamiliar, yet something about it made her heart skip a beat. She brought it inside, sat at the kitchen table, and stared at it for a long time before opening it. The moment she unfolded the paper, her hands began to tremble. The words were uneven, written in a rush but clear enough to read. The first line said, "If you are reading this, please believe me. I'm alive." The mother's breath caught in her throat. Her heart raced as she read the next line. "It's me, your little girl. I've been living somewhere far away. I can't come back yet, but I want you to know I'm safe." The paper fell from her hands, fluttering to the floor. For a moment, she couldn't move. It felt like the air around her had vanished. The father walked in, noticing her pale face and shaking hands. When she showed him the letter, he froze. Together they read it again, line by line, trying to make sense of it. The writer had included small details, things only their daughter would know. She mentioned the name of her favorite stuffed toy, the song her mother used to sing when she was afraid of storms, and the promise her father once made to build her a treehouse one summer. "I still remember everything," the letter said. "I don't know where I am, but it's a small island. There are other people here too. Please don't stop believing in me." At the bottom of the page there was a name, her childhood nickname, the one only her family used. It was written in the same looping style their daughter had used when she was learning to write. The father sat down slowly, staring at the words as if trying to see beyond them. The mother's tears fell freely, landing on the paper. She wanted to believe it, yet her mind fought against the possibility. After all these years, how could it be true? Could someone be playing a cruel joke? But her heart knew. She could feel it deep inside her, that the letter was real. They rushed to the local police station, letter in hand. The officers listened carefully, took notes, and promised to investigate. But by the end of the meeting, their expressions turned skeptical. The chief sighed and said it was probably a hoax. "These things happen," he explained gently. "People read about old cases and try to reach out, sometimes just for attention." The father clenched his fists but stayed silent. The mother tried to argue, showing the personal details in the letter, but the officers simply nodded and said they'd look into it. Days passed and no one called back. The mother couldn't sleep. She kept the letter close to her, reading it over and over. The more she read it, the more certain she became. This was her daughter's handwriting. The tone, the phrasing, even the way she signed her name, it was all too familiar. The father tried to stay calm, but deep down, hope began to rise again inside him, even though he was afraid of being disappointed. They decided to contact a private investigator, someone who had helped with missing person cases before. The investigator was a quiet, thoughtful man who had spent years tracing lost people. After hearing their story and reading the letter, he admitted it was unusual. "The writing feels genuine," he said. "And this postmark here. It's faint, but it's not local. Looks like it came from a small port town near the coast." That one detail was enough to set everything in motion again. The family began searching for information about that region. They spoke to fishermen, sailors, and even travelers who had visited the nearby islands. Most people hadn't heard of anyone stranded or living in isolation, but one old fisherman mentioned stories he'd heard about an island that didn't appear on most maps, a place hidden by fog and strong tides. Some said it was just superstition, a myth told to scare young sailors, but the mother's heart told her otherwise. That night, as the family sat together at the table, the letter between them, the mother said quietly, "If there's even a chance she's out there, I have to find her." The father looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. "We'll go together," he said. Their son, now older, spoke softly, his voice shaking a little. "I'll go too. I want to help bring her home." It was the first time in years they had spoken of her with such certainty, not as a memory, but as someone still living, still waiting. The air in the room felt different that night. The sadness that had filled their home for so long seemed to lift slightly, replaced by something fragile but real. Hope. As the mother went to bed, she placed the letter under her pillow. She lay awake for hours, imagining where her daughter might be, what the island looked like, who the people around her were, whether she still remembered the sound of her mother's voice. The thought that her little girl had survived, that she had grown up somewhere far away, made her heart ache and heal at the same time. Outside, the wind whispered softly through the trees. Somewhere across the sea on that unknown island, a young woman sat by a small fire looking up at the same stars. She held a small shell in her hand, one she had kept since childhood. It reminded her of home. She didn't know if her letter had reached anyone yet, but she whispered into the night, "Please, let them know I'm alive." And far away, her mother, half asleep, stirred as if she had heard her voice echoing in her dreams. The following week, the investigator called the family early in the morning. His voice carried both excitement and hesitation. He said he had found something unusual. The letter had been sent from a tiny coastal town that wasn't far from the area where their daughter had disappeared years ago. The postmark, faint but readable, came from a fishing port known for sending small supply boats out to scattered islands. Some of those islands weren't even officially mapped. Most were uninhabited, or so people believed. When the mother heard this, her hands trembled again. It felt like the first real clue in years. The father stood quietly beside her, processing every word. Their son, now a young adult, immediately began searching maps online, trying to find that coastal town. The excitement in their home was mixed with fear of getting their hopes up again only to have them broken. The investigator suggested they meet in person to discuss what to do next. That evening, they gathered around the same small kitchen table that had seen years of silence. The investigator spread out maps, photos, and reports he had collected over the past few days. "I spoke to a few fishermen from that port," he said, tapping the paper. "They say there are a few islands out here beyond where most boats go. There's talk about one place where a small group of people live quietly, away from the rest of the world." The father frowned. "How could people live there and no one knows?" The investigator shrugged. "It's not impossible. If a group found shelter there maybe years ago and had no way to return, they might have built a small community. Some islands around that region have strong currents, dangerous ones. Not many risk going near them." The mother leaned forward, her eyes fixed on the map. "You think she could be there?" The investigator hesitated before replying. "I don't know, but the letter coming from that area, it's worth checking." For the first time in a long while, the family had something to do, something that felt like hope taking form. They packed small bags, brought along the letter for reference, and made plans to visit that port town. The night before they left, none of them could sleep. The mother lay awake, her mind replaying every possible outcome. The father sat by the window, smoking quietly for the first time in years, while their son watched old family videos, pausing every time his sister's laughter filled the room. The next morning, they drove for hours along winding coastal roads. The air grew saltier the closer they got. When they finally arrived, the town looked peaceful but worn out. A handful of fishing boats tied along a wooden dock, children playing barefoot, and the smell of seaweed everywhere. The locals stared curiously at the newcomers. The mother clutched the letter tightly as they walked toward the small harbor master's office. The investigator introduced them and explained their situation. The harbor master, an older man with sunburned skin and tired eyes, listened carefully. When he read the letter's postmark, he nodded slowly. "That stamp belongs to us," he said. "But I don't remember anyone sending letters like this recently." He rubbed his chin thoughtfully. "Wait. Maybe one of the supply boat captains dropped it off. There's a man named Elias who sometimes brings mail from small islands. He comes here once every few months." The mother's heart jumped. "Can we talk to him?" "He's not here now," the man replied. "But he's expected back in 2 or 3 days." The waiting felt endless. The family stayed in a small guest house by the harbor. Every evening, they walked along the beach staring at the horizon, wondering if their daughter was looking at the same sunset somewhere far away. The sound of seagulls and the creaking of boats became their constant companions. At night, the mother wrote in her journal again, this time not letters of loss but of hope. On the 3rd day, just as the sun was rising, a small boat appeared in the distance. Its engine sputtered and the hull was weathered from years at sea. The harbor master came knocking on their door with a smile. "Elias is back," he said. "You'd better come." They rushed to the docks. The man known as Elias was unloading crates of supplies: rice, canned food, ropes, and fishing nets. He looked surprised when the family approached. After hearing their story and seeing the letter, he frowned deeply, running his thumb along the paper. "I've seen this handwriting before," he said slowly. "Not recently, but maybe a few months ago. A young woman gave me a note to post when I stopped near one of the small islands. She didn't tell me much, only that it was very important." The mother's eyes filled with tears. "Can you take us there, please?" Elias looked uneasy. "It's not that simple," he said. "Those waters are tricky, strong currents, and the island she's on, if it's the one I think, it's surrounded by rocks. No one goes there unless the weather is calm." The father stepped forward. "We'll pay whatever it costs. Just take us there." The sailors studied their faces for a moment, then sighed. "Money's not the issue. It's the risk, but—" He glanced toward the open sea. "If the weather stays clear tomorrow, we can try. You'll need to be ready at sunrise." That night, none of them slept much. The wind outside howled softly, making the window panes rattle. The mother sat on the edge of the bed, clutching the letter to her chest. Her son watched her quietly, not knowing what to say. The father packed essentials on food, water, blankets, as if he couldn't bear to stand still. By dawn, the sea had calmed. The family followed Elias to the boat, hearts pounding with both fear and hope. The journey began slowly, the small engine cutting through the morning fog. The coastline disappeared behind them, replaced by endless blue. The air grew colder and the waves stronger. Hours passed in near silence, broken only by the sound of gulls overhead. Elias pointed ahead. "That's the region," he said. "There are several small islands scattered here. Most of them look the same, but the one she mentioned had a tall tree near the shore, a palm that bends like a question mark." The mother gripped the side of the boat, scanning the horizon. For a while there was nothing but fog and water. Then faintly a shape began to form, green, small, and surrounded by mist. The closer they got, the clearer it became. It wasn't large, just a stretch of land covered in trees with rocky cliffs on one side. The wind carried the faint smell of smoke, as if someone had lit a fire. The boat slowed. Elias squinted, then pointed. "There," he said. "You see that smoke? That means someone's living there." The mother's heart nearly stopped. Tears welled in her eyes as she whispered, "She's there. She has to be." But before they could move closer, the waves began to rise. The wind picked up suddenly, and Elias cursed under his breath. "We can't land now. It's too rough. We'll have to circle and wait for calmer water." The family's hearts sank, but they nodded, trusting his judgment. The storm passed quickly, but the tension lingered. As the sun began to set, Elias finally guided the boat toward a small cove. They anchored near the shore, where the sand looked untouched. The air was silent except for the gentle crash of waves. The family could see footprints faintly marked in the sand. Not many, but enough to prove someone had been walking there recently. The mother stared at them, her heart beating faster than ever. She turned toward the father, whispering, "This is it. I can feel it." Elias nodded. "We'll go at first light," he said. "It's safer then." That night they stayed anchored near the island, the stars shining brightly above. The mother couldn't sleep. She sat on the deck, staring toward the faint glow of the island's fire. It was close enough to see, yet too far to reach. Every now and then she thought she heard faint voices carried by the wind, soft, distant, and hauntingly familiar. When dawn arrived, she was already awake, watching as the first light painted the water gold. The father came beside her, resting a hand on her shoulder. "Are you ready?" he asked quietly. She nodded, her eyes never leaving the island. "I've been ready for 10 years, she whispered. The boat drifted closer as the sun rose higher. The island's shape grew clearer, and then through the trees they saw movement. A figure stood on the shore, watching them approach. The moment the figure appeared on the beach, the mother froze. Her breath caught in her throat as she squinted against the rising sun. The person stood still, watching their boat drift closer. From that distance, it was hard to see the face clearly, but something in the way she stood, the way her hands rested by her sides, felt strangely familiar. The father raised his hand slowly, waving toward the figure. There was no response, not at first. The figure turned slightly, then took a step forward, cautious and uncertain, as if unsure whether to believe what she was seeing. The mother's heart pounded harder with every passing second. She whispered to the sailor, "Please take us closer." Elias adjusted the motor, guiding the small boat through the narrow passage between rocks. The waves slapped against the sides, but he kept his course steady. As they drew near, the figure became clearer. A young woman, barefoot, her hair long and tangled by the wind. Her clothes were simple, made from light fabric that looked worn but clean. She stood just where the water touched the sand, her eyes fixed on them with a mixture of fear and wonder. The mother couldn't wait any longer. Before anyone could stop her, she climbed down into the shallow water and began wading toward the shore. The father called her name, but she didn't hear him. Her legs moved on their own. The water reached her knees, then her waist, but she didn't stop. When she finally reached the beach, she stumbled forward, tears already spilling down her cheeks. The young woman took a step back, startled, as if unsure what was happening. For a moment, they both just stood there staring at each other. The mother's voice trembled when she finally spoke. Is it really you?" she whispered. The girl's eyes widened and her lips parted, but no sound came out. She looked frightened, confused, and then something changed. Recognition flashed in her eyes. Her hand came up slowly, shaking as if she was afraid the vision in front of her might disappear. The father and son reached the shore just in time to see her whisper, "Mother?" The single word broke the silence like thunder. The mother let out a sob and ran the last few steps, wrapping her arms around her daughter. The girl froze at first, then clung to her tightly, crying into her shoulder. It was as if time stopped right there. The sea, the wind, everything, just to make space for that moment. The father stood a few feet away, his hands trembling. When she turned toward him, her face wet with tears, his heart almost gave out. She looked different. Older, sun-kissed, with eyes that carried both strength and pain. But she was still his little girl. He took a few steps forward, afraid that moving too fast might break the spell. When she finally ran into his arms, he held her as if he would never let go again. Their son, who had watched from behind, covered his mouth with his hand. His eyes filled with tears, too. He had imagined this moment for years, but nothing could have prepared him for how real and overwhelming it felt. Elias stood back quietly, watching the reunion unfold. He had seen many strange things at sea, but nothing like this. He looked down at the sand, giving them space, knowing some moments were too sacred to interrupt. After what felt like forever, the family finally sat down on the shore, still holding hands, afraid to let go. The mother brushed the hair from her daughter's face, studying her features as if trying to memorize every line. "We thought we lost you," she whispered. "All these years we never stopped waiting." The daughter smiled weakly, her voice soft and unsteady. "I tried to come back," she said. "I tried so many times." Her words carried a sadness that made them all silent. She looked out toward the water, her gaze distant as if seeing memories too painful to speak. After a long pause, she began to tell them what had happened. That day, years ago, she had been walking along the shore, looking for shells, when a strong current pulled her into the water. She screamed, but the waves were too loud, and before she knew it, the sea had carried her far from land. She remembered holding on to a piece of driftwood, the sky turning dark, and the rain hitting her face. Then everything went black. When she woke up, she was lying on a strange beach. An old fisherman had found her half-conscious and brought her to a small island where a few other people were living. They had all been shipwrecked at different times, sailors, travelers, even a young couple who had been lost at sea for years. The island had food, fresh water, and shelter, but no way to contact the outside world. Their boats were broken, and every attempt to leave ended in disaster because of the unpredictable waves and hidden rocks surrounding the island. "At first, I thought it was only for a few days," she said quietly, but days turned into months and months into years. "I never stopped hoping someone would come. I tried sending messages in bottles, but none ever came back." Her voice broke when she spoke about the old fisherman. "He saved me," she said softly. "He taught me how to survive here, but he got sick 2 years ago. After he passed away, I felt completely alone." The mother's eyes filled with tears again. She squeezed her daughter's hand, unable to imagine the pain she must have felt. The father asked gently, "How did you manage to send that letter?" The girl smiled faintly. "A few months ago, a supply boat passed near the island. They never come close, but that day the sea was calm. I ran to the shore and waved a piece of cloth. They stopped for a moment. I gave one of the men my letter and begged him to send it when he reached land. She looked at Elias then, her eyes widening in recognition. "You were the one, weren't you?" Elias nodded slowly. "I remember you now," he said. "You looked so desperate I couldn't refuse." The mother reached out and took her daughter's hand again, tears streaming down her face. "You saved her?" she whispered to the sailor. Elias shook his head humbly. "No," he said. "She saved herself. She never gave up." The family sat there for hours listening to her story, filling the spaces between words with tears and silence. The island around them was peaceful, birds calling in the trees, waves brushing softly against the rocks. It was hard to believe that a place so quiet could hold so many years of loneliness and survival. As the day went on, the daughter showed them where she had lived. She led them through a narrow path surrounded by palm trees to a small hut made of wood and dried leaves. Inside were simple things: a woven mat, a few seashells, a piece of driftwood carved with marks counting the years, and a bundle of letters she had written but never sent. The mother picked one up carefully. "You wrote to us too," she whispered. "I wrote every year," her daughter said, "even when I thought you might not be alive anymore. It helped me believe I still had a family waiting." The father walked to the doorway, staring out at the horizon. "We're taking you home," he said firmly. "No matter what it takes," the girl smiled weakly. "There are others here too," she said. "People who have been waiting for rescue for years." Elias nodded. "We'll tell the authorities. We'll make sure everyone is brought back safely." As the sun began to set, the family sat together outside the hut, watching the sky turn shades of orange and gold. The daughter rested her head on her mother's shoulder, a peace she hadn't felt in years settling over her. The sound of waves and rustling leaves felt like a lullaby. That night they stayed on the island. The fire crackled softly and the stars shone brighter than they ever had. The mother couldn't stop glancing at her daughter, afraid that if she looked away she might vanish again. The father stayed close too, his arm protectively around her shoulders. For the first time in 10 long years, they felt whole again, broken pieces slowly coming together, fragile but real. The daughter closed her eyes, whispering, "I always believed you would find me." The mother smiled through her tears. "And I always knew you were still out there." The morning after their reunion, the island looked softer, warmer, as if it too could feel the peace that had returned. The family woke early, their minds still trying to believe that everything was real. The daughter sat quietly by the shore, watching the waves move gently across the sand. For years, that same sea had been her prison, her only link to the world she missed. Now it would finally take her home. The mother came and sat beside her, wrapping a light shawl around her shoulders. "You didn't sleep," she said softly. The girl smiled faintly. "I was afraid if I closed my eyes I'd wake up and find out this was just another dream." The mother squeezed her hand. "It's real, my love. We're here, and we're not leaving you again." A little while later, Elias joined them carrying a small pot of tea. "We'll head back once the tide is right," he said. "But we'll need to take it slow. The rocks around the island are sharp. We'll need to steer carefully." The father nodded, already helping gather supplies. The plan was simple. Take the small boat back to the main ship waiting farther out, then return to the mainland by evening. From there, the authorities could be called to rescue the remaining people still living on the island. Before they left, the daughter asked for a little time to say goodbye. She walked to the far end of the beach where the old fisherman's grave stood, a simple wooden cross made from driftwood, decorated with shells. She knelt beside it, her fingers brushing over the sand. "You told me never to give up," she whispered. "And you were right. They found me." Her eyes glistened with tears, but this time they weren't tears of sorrow. "Thank you for keeping me alive when I had no one." When she returned, the boat was ready. The family helped her climb in, and Elias started the engine. The sound of it echoed through the still air. As the boat moved away from the shore, she turned around one last time. The island grew smaller with every passing minute, fading into the horizon, the place that had once been her world, now just a memory. The journey back was quiet at first. The sea was calm, the sunlight glittering on the surface. The daughter leaned against her father's shoulder, her eyes half closed. For the first time in years, she wasn't watching the horizon in fear. She was watching it in peace. The mother reached over and brushed her hair gently. "You look stronger," she said with a smile. "You must have become very brave living there all alone." The girl chuckled softly. "I had to be. There were storms that could tear the trees apart. Nights so dark you couldn't see your own hands. But after every storm I'd think of you, all of you, waiting somewhere out there. That thought kept me alive. The father's throat tightened. And we were waiting, he said. Every single day. He glanced at Elias, who was focused on steering, then added quietly, "You gave us hope again." After a few hours, they finally saw the outline of the main ship. The son jumped up, waving his arms. "There it is," he shouted. A wave of relief passed through them all. The daughter smiled. She hadn't seen a real ship in years. To her, it looked like freedom itself. When they climbed aboard, the crew gathered around, astonished. Elias introduced her, explaining how she had survived. The captain, an older man with kind eyes, took off his hat and said, "You're one strong young lady. We'll make sure you get home safe." The crew offered her food and water, things she hadn't tasted in so long, warm bread, fruits, and real tea. The first bite made her eyes fill with tears. "It tastes like home," she whispered. As the ship began its journey back to the mainland, the family stood together on deck, the wind blowing through their hair. The daughter looked out at the open water. "I used to hate this ocean," she said quietly. "But now, I think I understand it. It took me away, but it also brought me back." The mother wrapped an arm around her and said, "Sometimes life does that. It breaks us before it brings us home." Hours passed, and finally land appeared in the distance, a long stretch of coastline shining under the afternoon sun. The harbor came into view, and soon the sound of waves was joined by distant voices, cars, and seagulls. The daughter's heart raced. She had dreamed of this sound for years. When the ship docked, a small crowd had already gathered. Word had spread about a girl found alive after so many years. People clapped and cheered as she stepped onto the pier, holding her mother's hand tightly. The father helped her down carefully. Reporters tried to ask questions, but Elias waved them back, giving the family space. The authorities met them soon after, taking notes as the father explained what had happened and giving their word that rescue teams would return for the others trapped on the island. One of the officers offered the daughter a blanket, noticing her shivering. "You're safe now," he said gently. She smiled weakly. "Yes," she whispered. "I am." The family drove back to their old home that evening. The house had changed a little over the years. A few new trees in the yard, a different color on the walls. But it still smelled the same. The daughter paused at the door, her eyes filling again. "It feels smaller," she said softly, "but warmer." The mother laughed through her tears. "That's because it's full of love waiting for you." Inside, everything felt frozen in time. Her old room still had some of her things, faded photos, books, a small seashell she had once found on the same beach she was taken from. She walked around, touching each thing like it was a treasure. "I used to dream of this room," she whispered. "I thought maybe it didn't exist anymore." The son smiled shyly from the doorway. "It was always here. We never changed it." That night, they had dinner together at the table for the first time in 10 years. The food was simple, light soup, bread, vegetables, and dye, but every bite was filled with emotion. The daughter told them stories about the island, how she learned to fish with her bare hands, how she built a rain catcher, and how she made up songs to keep herself company. The family listened like children hearing a bedtime story. Every word she spoke made them realize how strong she had become. When the night grew quiet, the daughter stepped outside to the porch. The moonlight bathed the garden in silver. The air was cool, the sound of crickets soft. Her father came out beside her. "Hard to believe it's really over," he said. She nodded. "It's not over," she replied. "It's just different now. I think I'll always carry the island with me. It taught me how to survive, how to believe." He looked at her proudly. "And we'll never stop being grateful that you did." A week later, the authorities announced that rescue teams had reached the island. Everyone who had been stranded there was safe. The news spread quickly, and the story of the girl who survived alone for years touched thousands of hearts. Messages poured in, letters, calls, gifts, from people saying her story gave them hope. But for the family, the biggest gift was simply having her home again. In the months that followed, the daughter began adjusting to her old life. At first, she found it strange, and the noise, the lights, the crowds. But slowly, it became familiar again. Sometimes she'd wake up in the middle of the night expecting to hear waves crashing or wind howling through palm leaves, and then she'd remember she was safe. Her mother would find her sitting by the window, smiling quietly at the stars. "Thinking of the island again?" she'd ask. The daughter would nod. "Yes, but also thinking how lucky I am." One evening, they all went back to the same beach where it had all begun. The sea was calm, the sky painted in shades of pink and gold. The daughter walked to the water's edge, her feet sinking into the cool sand. She looked out at the horizon, the same one that had once separated her from everything she loved. Now it felt different. It no longer looked endless or cruel. It looked like a bridge, something that connected, not divided. The father placed a small wreath of flowers in the water. "For those who never made it home," he said quietly. The daughter watched it float away, her hand in her mother's. The wind carried their silence, peaceful and full of gratitude. As the sun dipped below the waves, she whispered, "I used to think I was lost, but maybe I was just on my way back." Her mother smiled, tears glimmering in her eyes. "You were never lost," she said softly. "You were always on your way home." And as the waves kissed the shore, the family stood together, whole again, stronger than ever, wrapped in the quiet beauty of the moment that once only lived in their dreams.